There is a man in Tyvek putting my name on paper I have never touched. Then we go tonight, and we finish it. No, we go through the board. I want it done properly. Properly takes 3 weeks. Nadia Boyd was 29 years old, cooking 6 nights a week for a diplomat's family on the 55th floor of a tower in Songdo, with an asylum hearing 5 weeks out and a resume she had cut in half before anyone in Incheon ever read it. The man across the table from her was Jikyung Oh, also 29, chancellor-in-waiting of a private university and medical school his great-grandfather built. A man who could read a room down to the seconds a person had hesitated outside its door, and who was carrying one lie so old he had stopped feeling the weight of it. And somewhere below them both, in a countryside distillery warehouse where the air smelled of wet oak and cold iron, a retired man named Jikyung Oh was quietly counting votes to take everything from him, using her as the reason. What does it cost a woman who has already lost one country to refuse the easiest revenge in the second one? Stay with this one, because a name signed in the wrong hand is only the beginning. And this story does not end the way you think it will. If this story meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me what you would have said to him in that last room if it had been you standing there. I read every single one. If you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications. And I promise the next story will be even harder to walk away from. Thank you for watching until the very end. I will see you in the next one. And before we begin, tell me this. Have you ever been in a room where the quietest person held all the power and everyone else was still talking? The server who worked that private dining room, a young man named Jikyung Oh who had poured wine for 3 ambassadors and a sitting minister without once being spoken to directly, remembered the night in specifics. He remembered the smell first, which was not food. It was the faint chemical sharpness of hydraulic fluid tracked in on somebody's shoe from the service elevator, and it sat under the braced short rib like a wrong note held too long. He remembered that the woman came out of the kitchen still holding a towel, which she never did. He remembered that Jikyung Oh stood up when she came in, which he did not do for anyone, and that the old man at the head of the table did not stand at all. And he remembered the silence, because he counted it. 11 seconds. From the moment the door closed behind her to the moment anyone spoke. He had worked that floor for 14 months, and he had never heard 11 seconds of nothing in a room with 9 people in it. What Jikyung Oh did not know, what none of them at that table knew, was that the woman with the towel in her hands had spent the previous night on the floor of a storage closet with a soldering iron and a toy store drone frame, teaching a $200 machine to follow a car. She had done that kind of work before. She had just never told anyone in this country about it. 9 weeks before the 11 seconds, on a Tuesday, with rain coming off the yellow sea in flat gray sheets, Nadia Boyd was standing on a step stool in a kitchen on the 55th floor with her arm inside a convection oven, up to the shoulder. She was 29 years old, 5 feet 9 in flat shoes, which was tall enough that she had learned to stop apologizing for taking up the doorway. She had grown up in a brick bungalow in the Sherman Park neighborhood on Milwaukee's north side, 1 block from a record shop with a bell on the door, and she had come to Incheon by a route that took 2 years and cost her almost everything she had ever been able to prove about herself. Her job was to cook 6 nights a week for a diplomat's family. Dinner at 7, 4 adults and 2 children under 9, plus whatever guests appeared on the household schedule with 90 minutes of warning. Her contract said household chef. Her actual duties, as she had come to understand them, included the pantry inventory, the children's school lunches, the wine log, and now the oven, because the fan bearing had begun to whine at exactly the pitch that made the diplomat's wife press 2 fingers to her temple. The service company quoted 11 days for a part. Nadia had a motor in her bag from the toy store where she worked 3 afternoons a week, a 6-volt gearbox unit meant for a remote control excavator, and she had already established that its shaft diameter was within 0.5 millimeter of what she needed. It took her 41 minutes. She used a bent paperclip to hold the housing while the epoxy set, and she wiped the flux residue off the sheet metal with a vinegar rag so nobody would smell it at dinner. Then she washed her hands twice, put on her clean apron, and started the short rib. Here is what she did not tell anyone in that building. In another country, under a badge with her photograph on it, she had designed the arm assemblies for unmanned ground vehicles for a defense contractor. She had signed non-disclosure paperwork thick enough to stand upright. She had once spent 14 straight hours in a bay that smelled of aviation fuel and hot rubber, watching a machine she built cross 400 feet of gravel and lift a 30-pound object without crushing it. Her resume in Incheon did not mention any of that. She had cut it in half before a single person here read it, because a woman applying for domestic work with a robotics engineering history reads as either a liar or a problem, and she could not afford to be read as either. So the resume said restaurants. It said catering. It said knife skills, allergen management, conversational Korean. The plastic sleeve in her bag said something else. Inside it was a hearing notice with a date on it, 14 weeks out, and a case number, and her name spelled correctly, which had taken 3 attempts to fix. Asylum. The word still sat in her mouth like a stone she was trying not to bite down on. Her lawyer was a tired woman in Bupyeong who charged her at a reduced rate and answered emails at 1 in the morning, and who had told her gently that her case was strong but thin, and that thin cases lived or died on whether the record was clean. Nadia kept it clean. She kept her rent receipts in date order. She kept her payslips. She wrote down every hour she worked in a composition notebook in pen, because someday someone might ask. That was the shape of her life. Cook count, keep the paper straight, and do not become interesting to anyone. 9 weeks later, a room would go silent for 11 seconds because of her. But that Tuesday, she was just the woman on the step stool, and the guest list for dinner had 1 addition, and nobody thought to tell her his name. He came into the kitchen at 8:40 after the plates went out, which guests did not do. He was 29 years old, and he looked younger from the doorway and older when he stopped moving. Charcoal suit, no tie, hands loose at his sides. He did not fill the space the way rich men usually filled a space. He simply stood in it and let the room organize itself around him, and Nadia, who had spent 9 months learning to read the household's guests by how they treated the staff, understood within about 4 seconds that this one was worse than dangerous. This one was paying attention. He said good evening in English, then he asked, in Korean, who had repaired the oven. She told him the service company came Monday. The service company did not come Monday, he said. The building log shows a lift reservation for a technician that was cancelled at 9:15 in the morning. And no technician removes a fan housing and leaves the original screws in the tray, because they lose them. Yours are in the tray. There was no accusation in it. That was the part that landed. He was not catching her out. He was simply saying the true thing in a level voice, the way another man might comment on the weather and waiting to see what she did with it. I fixed it, she said. With what? A motor. From where? A toy. Seokjin Mok looked at her hands then. She did not hide them, because hiding them would have been an answer. He looked at the pad of her right thumb, at the small pale crescent below the knuckle, shiny and slightly puckered. That is not a knife, he said. That is a soldering iron. You held it wrong once, in a hurry, and you kept working afterward. 11 weeks later, she would understand what he was doing in that kitchen and why he had asked about the screws. That night, she only knew that her pulse had gone somewhere it had no business going, and that she made herself finish plating the pears before she let herself look at him again. Anything else, sir? He held the pause about a second longer than was comfortable, which she would come to learn was not a habit but a decision. No, he said. Thank you for the oven. He was gone before she remembered she had not asked who he was. The housekeeper told her the next morning, in the tone people used for weather warnings, Seokjin Mok, chancellor-in-waiting of a private university and medical school built by his great-grandfather, old money and older obligations. 2 hospitals, a research institute, A name on 40 buildings. Do not be memorable to him, the housekeeper said, and refilled the rice cooker, and that was the end of the conversation. That became the pattern over the next several weeks, and the pattern was almost nothing, which is why it worked on her. He came to the residence 4 more times in 23 days. Twice on the official calendar, twice on the diplomat's private one. He never lingered in the kitchen more than 6 or 7 minutes. He asked her one question each visit, and it was never about her, which she noticed, because everybody asked her about herself in a way designed to establish where she ranked. He asked whether the induction hobs held temperature under load. He asked why she salted the short rib the night before and not that morning. He asked once whether the record shop she had mentioned in passing was still open, and when she said she did not know, he did not offer to find out, and she was grateful in a way she resented. On the 4th visit, he said, without preamble, "You stood outside that door for 9 seconds before you came in." She had. She had stood there with a tray, listening to the men laugh at something, deciding what face to wear. Deciding, he said, not hesitating. "There is a difference, and most people cannot tell." She said, "All right." Somewhere inside her, a door closed very quietly, and she was the only one who heard the latch, understand something about a woman in her position. She was not free to want anything. Every want was a risk to the file. And the file was the only thing standing between her and a plane. She lay on her rented mattress in Bupyeong at 2 in the morning and argued with herself in the dark, and the argument was never about whether he was interesting. It was about what interest cost a person with 14 weeks on a clock and no country to fall back into. She lost the argument slowly, the way you lose a tooth. A little pressure, every day. The other thing that happened during those weeks happened 180 kilometers east, in a warehouse in Taebaek, and Nadia would not know about it for another 31 days. Jikyung Oh was retired. That was the official position, stated in the past tense at 3 separate memorial dinners, and everyone in the room had agreed with it out loud. He had turned over the chair. He had accepted the gift. He had gone to the countryside where his family's distillery had been quietly making rice spirits since 1961, and he had grown thinner and courteous and very, very patient. What he had not done was stop counting. He kept the old guard's numbers in his head, 22 men and their proxies. And he understood something the current leadership had not yet grasped, which is that authority does not transfer, it lends. He had spent 40 years building a thing he called his legacy. And the university that carried the mock name carried his money in the foundations, and in his arithmetic that made the chancellorship a room he was still entitled to stand in. Then his people brought him a report about a woman who cooked on the 55th floor in Songdo and a young man who stood up when she entered a room. He did not shout. By every account, he never shouted. He asked one question, which was how many weeks until her hearing, and when they told him, he wrote the number on the inside cover of a ledger with a fountain pen, and he asked for the file on her lawyer. The pretext was the marriage. There was no marriage. There was not even a dinner, yet. But Jikyung Oh had understood before anyone else, including Nadia herself, exactly where this was going. And he understood that a foreign woman with an open immigration case was the cleanest possible reason to convene the old guard behind the current chair's back and put a vote of no confidence on the table. Not because of who she was, because she was disposable and unsanctioned, and easy to describe unkindly to men who wanted to be told the world was slipping. He met her once, before any of the rest of it. He came to the residence as somebody's guest of honor, and Nadia found him in the service corridor by the linen cart at 9:20 at night, small and immaculate, with the faint smell of wet oak on his coat. He greeted her politely. He asked, in careful English, whether she was comfortable in Incheon. She said, "Yes, sir." Then he said her lawyer's name, first and last, correctly, and the name of the district office where her file sat, and the date on the notice in the plastic sleeve in her bag. "You have 11 weeks, he said. "A great deal can be added to a file in 11 weeks. Very little can be removed." He did not threaten her. He simply demonstrated the size of his hand and let her look at it. "I understand," she said. "I hope so," he said. "You seem competent." Competent people usually know when to stop. He inclined his head and went back to the dinner, and Nadia stood by the linen cart for a while with her heart going and her hands perfectly still. Here is what she had not let herself feel yet, and what she would not be able to avoid feeling by the end of that month. Not fear. Fear she was fluent in. It was the older, colder thing underneath, the specific insult of being told by a man who had never seen her work that she was a complication in somebody else's story. 8 days later, her lawyer forwarded her a scan with a note that said, "Please look at this and call me." It was an entry in a records index. A consultancy declaration filed in Tyvek, notarized, listing an equipment specialist by the name of Nadia Boyd, with a passport number that was 1 digit off hers and a signature that leaned right. Nadia's signature leaned left. It had leaned left since the 4th grade. She sat on the floor of her room with the scan open on her phone and the vinegar smell of the flux rag still faintly in her sleeve, and she did the only thing she knew how to do with a problem this size. She started taking it apart to see how it was built. The clerk at the notary's office in Tyvek remembered the woman because of the gloves. It was the 2nd week of a warm month, and the office had no air conditioning, only a standing fan that pushed the smell of toner and floor wax around the room. And the woman who came in at 11 in the morning to have a consultancy declaration notarized kept thin black driving gloves on the entire time. She wore sunglasses indoors and pushed them up into her hair only once, to read a line. She paid the fee in cash. She signed fast, the way people sign when they have signed that name many times, and she did not correct the clerk when he read the name back to her in the flat, careful way Koreans read foreign names aloud. Nadia. Boyd. The clerk stamped it, filed it, and forgot about her by lunch, which is what he was paid for. 12 days later, in a rented room in Bupyeong, with a mattress on the floor and a scan open on her phone, the real one was taking the document apart the way she used to take apart a failed actuator, which is to say slowly, in order, writing down everything before she let herself have an opinion about it. Page 1, item 1. The passport number. 8 of the 9 characters were hers. The 9th was not. Nadia sat with that for a long time, because a wrong digit is not a mistake when it is exactly 1 digit. A mistake looks like sloppiness. 1 digit looks like a decision, and she knew what the decision was for. 1 digit off meant the document was not technically her passport. It meant that if the thing collapsed, whoever built it could say, "Look, this is a different woman entirely." An unfortunate coincidence of names. How strange. Item 2. The signature. It leaned right, and it leaned right consistently, across 2 pages and an initial box, which meant it was not a forger copying her hand badly. It was somebody signing in their own. Item 3. The date. A Tuesday. She checked her composition notebook, and on that Tuesday she had written, in pen, 6 hours 45 minutes, residence, Songdo, and under it, school lunches times 2, wine log. She had been 180 kilometers west of that notary's office with her arm in a walk-in refrigerator, and she could prove it. And she understood immediately that being able to prove where she was would matter less than the fact that she had to. She called her lawyer at 7 in the morning, which was the earliest she permitted herself. The tired woman in Bupyeong did not soften it, and Nadia was grateful, in the way you are grateful to a surgeon who tells you the truth about your own body. The declaration described paid technical consultancy, equipment specialist. An asylum applicant with a pending case had permission to work in exactly the ways her paperwork said and no others, and a notarized document asserting she had taken engineering consultancy money outside. That permission was not a rumor or an accusation. It was a filed record. It sat in an index that anyone reviewing her case could pull, and it did 2 things at once. It made her a person who had worked illegally, and it made her a person who had concealed a professional history on every form she had ever submitted. They will not have to prove you did it, her lawyer said. They will only have to ask you about it. Do you understand the difference? Yes. Say it back to me. An unanswered question in the file is worse than a bad answer. An unanswered question in the file is the whole file, her lawyer said. I can fight a document. I need weeks, and I need the original, not an index entry. Do you have weeks? Nadia looked at the plastic sleeve on the floor beside her knee and at the date on the notice inside it and did the arithmetic she had been doing every morning for a month. 10, she said. About 10. That number did not hold either. The rest happened in the ordinary way these things happen, which is to say through polite people doing small procedural things in the correct order. On a Thursday, the placement agency that had put her in the residence emailed to say they were conducting a routine documentation review of all household staff and would require original copies of everything, at her expense, notarized, within 14 days. On the following Monday, her hours were adjusted from 6 nights to 4, described as a seasonal reduction in entertaining, which was interesting, because Nadia kept the wine log, and the wine log said entertaining was up. On Wednesday, the diplomat's wife came into the kitchen at 4 in the afternoon and stood by the island with her hands folded, and Nadia knew from the folding. The household had received a letter. Not from immigration. From no one, technically. A plain inquiry on cream paper from an office identifying itself as a compliance secretariat, asking, with great courtesy, whether the residence was aware of the employment classification of one of its domestic personnel, and noting that certain records had come to their attention. I'm not accusing you of anything, the diplomat's wife said. I'm telling you that this house cannot be in a letter. I understand. Do you have somewhere to be, if it comes to that? Nadia said, I have 4 nights a week here, and left it. And the diplomat's wife looked at her for a moment with something that was almost regret, and then asked whether the children could have the pear thing again on Friday. There was a small mercy in it, and she did not recognize it as one until much later. Nobody in that house shouted at her. Nobody accused her. They simply began, one at a time, to step back from her the way people step back from a wet floor sign. The housekeeper was the one who broke. It happened in the service corridor on a Saturday by the same linen cart, and it took less than a minute. The older woman was folding towels, and she did not look up, and she said, in Korean, that a man had come twice to the loading level and asked questions about the foreign cook, and that she had answered them. And that she had answered them because her son was in his 2nd year at a university in Seoul, and the tuition invoice came from an office that bore a family name. She was not going to say out loud in this hallway. He asked when you came and when you left, she said. He asked if you were ever alone with anyone. I told him what is true. I did not add anything. Nadia thought about being angry, tested the shape of it, and put it down. I know, she said. I told you not to be memorable. You did. The housekeeper folded another towel, and her hands were not steady, and she said, I'm sorry, which in 9 months Nadia had never heard her say about anything, including the time she broke a serving dish that was older than both of them. That is what a man like Jikyung Oh actually does to a house. He does not have to walk into it. He simply becomes the reason everyone in it is a little afraid of everyone else. In the warehouse in Taebaek, the count stood at 9. He needed 12 to make it a conversation and 15 to make it inevitable. And he had 9 committed and 4 who wanted to be persuaded in person, over food, with the door closed, which he considered fair. Men who had given him 40 years were entitled to be flattered before they were used. The warehouse was cold, even in summer, because of the depth of the stone, and it smelled of wet oak and cold iron, and he had a folding table brought in and set with 3 dishes and no alcohol, which was a message his generation could read. Along the wall stood the vats his father had bought in 1961. Above them, on a shelf, sat the ledgers, and on the inside cover of one of them was a number in fountain pen ink that he revised every Sunday. The folder he passed around the table was thin, and that was deliberate. Thick folders invite reading. Thin folders invite agreement. Inside it were 4 photographs and 1 page. The photographs were unremarkable, and that was the point. A young man in a charcoal suit standing up from a chair, a woman in a white kitchen jacket, the two of them in a corridor 3 feet apart with nothing happening at all. The page listed a name, a nationality, a pending immigration case number, and a single line describing a notarized consultancy declaration filed in this very county, listing that same woman as a paid equipment specialist. He did not say the word marriage. He let the men at the table say it, and they did, on the 3rd night, one of them at a time, the way he had known they would. "The institution has a chancellor coming who is 29 years old," one of them said. That was already generous. "It is not the age," Jikyung Oh said. "It is the judgment." That was the entire speech. He was not a man who made speeches. He counted, and he waited. And he let other people's imaginations do the work that pressure used to do when he was younger and had more time. Understand what he was really protecting, because Jikyung Oh would eventually say it out loud in a room where it cost him something. It was never the university. A man who spent 40 years building a legacy and then handed it over discovers something nobody warns him about, which is that a legacy keeps going without him and improves, and that the improving is the insult. Control is what he reached for because the alternative was sitting in a cold warehouse in the countryside and being nobody's problem anymore. Nadia saw Jikyung Oh twice during those weeks, and both times were 6 minutes long, and both times she thought afterward about a different sentence than the one she had said. The first time he came into the kitchen and did not ask about equipment. He stood at the end of the island with his hands loose, and he said, "Your hours were cut on the 11th. Your notebook has 4 nights in it since then. You have started writing the times in the margins in pencil first, then going over them in pen, which means you do not trust yourself to remember correctly anymore." She kept julienning. She got to the end of the leak before she answered. "Have you been reading my notebook? It is open on the shelf by the scale. You leave it open, because it is honest." A pause, 1 second longer than was comfortable. "You have not been sleeping." "That is not a question." "No." She set the knife down flat, which she had been trained to do at 19 and did without thinking, and she said, "Someone filed a paper in Taebaek with my name on it. Not my signature. My name." She had not planned to say it. It arrived out of her mouth already assembled. He did not react the way people react. He did not say, "That is terrible," or "Who would do that?" He went entirely still, and it was not the stillness of a man calculating an angle, and it was the stillness of a man who has been touched on an old injury by a stranger who could not possibly know it was there. Then he said, "Not everyone whose name is on a document earned the right to stand under it." Nadia waited. He said, "I will find out who filed it." "No." "Why?" "Because if you find out who filed it, I become a woman Amok did a favor for," she said. "And then the paper is not a lie anymore. It is just early." He looked at her for what she would later estimate at 4 seconds, and something moved behind his face and was put away, and he said, "That is the most accurate thing anyone has said to me this year." The second time, at the end of the month, he brought her nothing and offered her nothing. And she understood by then that this was the most he was able to give her, and that he had understood what she asked for and had chosen to obey it, which no one with his last name had ever had to do for anybody. At the door he said, "There are men counting votes. It is not about you." "It is a little about me." "No," he said. "You are the reason they will give. There is a difference, and most people cannot tell." Why had she not walked away? She asked herself that on the bus, with her forehead against the glass and the city going by in wet smears of light. She had 8 weeks. She had 4 nights and a toy store and a room. Walking away cost her nothing and would have been the sane, survivable, adult thing to do. And she could not find the part of herself that wanted to. She went to Taebaek on a Tuesday, on her own money, on a bus that left Incheon at 6:20 in the morning. The notary's office was on the 2nd floor above a pharmacy. It smelled of toner and floor wax and, faintly, of diesel from the depot 2 streets over, and the standing fan was still going. Nadia asked politely, in her careful Korean, whether she could view the register for a filing made under her own name, and produced her passport and watched the clerk's face do something she would remember for the rest of her life. He looked at the passport. He looked at her. He looked at the passport again. "You are not the same lady," he said. "No." "The lady was smaller," he said, and held his hand up and dropped it about 3 inches below the top of Nadia's shoulder. "And she wore gloves." "In summer." He seemed embarrassed to be saying it. "And she wrote with the right hand, fast." Nadia's hands had gone cold in a warm room. "Did she speak Korean?" "Very well," he said. "Better than you. Sorry." "Do not be sorry. Please. Did she come alone?" The clerk hesitated, and then said that a car had waited downstairs with a driver in it, and that he only remembered because the driver had left the engine running the whole 20 minutes, and someone from the pharmacy had come out to complain. He would not let her photograph the register. He did let her look at it, and she looked at her own name in someone else's handwriting, a name written by a hand that had clearly written it before, and the feeling that went through her was not fear. It was vertigo. Somewhere in this country there was a woman who could say her name, spell it, sign it, present a number that was almost her number, and walk out of a room having been her for 20 minutes. And Nadia, standing there with the real passport in her hand, was the one who had to prove which of them existed. She wrote it all down on the bus home. Gloves, right hand, 3 inches shorter. Fluent. Car with a driver, engine running, 20 minutes. She started a new column in the composition notebook on a fresh page, and at the top of the column she wrote a single word, which was who. The notice was waiting for her under the door of her room. Not a hearing postponement. The opposite. A supplemental request for evidence, with a response deadline and a new date on the calendar for a status appearance, and when she sat on the floor and counted it out on her fingers like a child, she got 5 weeks. 5 weeks to produce originals she did not have, from a country that would not speak to her, to disprove a document signed in a hand that was not hers. While the household stepped back and the agency asked for notarized copies, and a man in a cold warehouse 180 kilometers east added a 10th name to a list. She did not cry. You should know that about her. She sat there with the paper in her lap and the smell of hot resin and ozone still in her sleeve from the toy store repair bench, where she had spent that afternoon fixing a returned quadcopter with a cracked motor arm that the manager had told her to just throw out. She had not thrown it out. It was in her bag, wrapped in a dish towel, along with a $200 frame nobody wanted and a battery pack she had already tested twice. Nadia Boyd looked at the deadline. Then she looked at the bag. Then she began, very calmly, to think about what a car looks like from above. The count reached 13 on a Thursday, and Jikyung chose the room himself. He could have done it in the warehouse. He preferred the warehouse. But a vote of no confidence taken in a cold building that smelled of wet oak would look, in the retelling, like something done in the dark by an old man, and Jikyung had spent 40 years understanding that a thing is only as legitimate as the room it happens in. So he asked a favor of a diplomat who owed him one, and the favor was a private dining room on the 55th floor in Songdo on a Friday for 9 people, including himself, at 7 in the evening, with the house staff kept to a minimum. He was aware, when he chose it, that the woman cooked there 4 nights a week. He considered that a courtesy. She would see the men who decided, and she would understand. And understanding is cheaper than force. He arrived 20 minutes early, which was his habit, and he asked for water. The night before that dinner, Nadia Boyd sat on the floor of a storage closet on the loading level with a soldering iron, a $200 toy store frame, a cracked quadcopter arm splinted with epoxy and a strip of aluminum from a baking sheet, and a battery pack she had tested twice and then tested a 3rd time because the 3rd time cost her nothing. What she needed was not a weapon. It was a witness. The man who came to the loading level asking questions drove a gray sedan and parked it in the same bay both times. And the housekeeper, who had told her that much already and who had said sorry once in 9 months, told her the rest without being asked. The plate. The hours. That he came Wednesdays. Nadia did not need to follow him far. She needed 4 minutes of altitude and a camera that held a horizon. She had written altitude hold code for machines that cost more than the building she grew up in. Teaching a toy to hold 90 feet over a parking structure and keep one gray roof centered in frame took her the better part of a night. And she did it with a laptop from a second-hand shop, a spare receiver, and the specific patience of a woman who had once spent 14 hours in a bay watching a machine cross 400 feet of gravel. At 6:52 the next morning, the sedan left the loading level, and a small ugly thing with a splinted arm went up off the roof deck behind it and did exactly what it was told. The car did not go to Taebaek. It went 11 minutes inland to a low office building in Namdong with a placement agency on the 3rd floor, and it waited at the curb with the engine running, and at 7:14 a woman came out and got in. She was small. She was carrying a document folder. She was wearing thin black gloves in warm weather, and she got into the back seat behind the driver, and the drone held 90 feet and recorded 6 minutes and 40 seconds of it before Nadia brought it down onto the roof deck and sat with her back against the parapet and her hands shaking, not from fear. The agency had asked her for originals of everything, at her expense, notarized. The agency had held a scan of her passport for 9 months, 8 of 9 characters. A woman who read foreign names for a living and could spell hers without being told, who wrote fast in her own right hand because she had written that name on forms hundreds of times. She had been looking for a forger. There had never been a forger. There had only ever been a clerk with a copy of her life in a filing cabinet, and a man who paid her in cash, and 20 minutes above a pharmacy. What Nadia understood, sitting on that roof at 7:30 in the morning with the smell of hot resin still in her sleeve, was this. She now had enough to end someone, and the only person in the world who could confirm any of it was a woman who had put on gloves to become her. The dinner served at 7. 9 people, 4 courses, no alcohol on the table by request of the guest of honor, which the diplomat's wife found strange and which Nadia understood perfectly. At 8:12, Jikyung Oh came into the kitchen and said, quietly, that the old gentleman had asked whether the cook was on the floor tonight. At 8:15, the woman from the agency arrived. She came up the service side because that is where people like her are told to come. And she stood by the linen cart with a document folder against her chest, waiting to be called in and shown to men as proof. She was 3 inches shorter than Nadia. She was wearing the gloves. Nadia came out of the kitchen still holding a towel, which she never did. They looked at each other in a corridor that smelled of hydraulic fluid tracked in from the service elevator, and the woman's face went through 3 things in about 2 seconds, and none of them was surprise, which was the worst part. She had known there was a real one. She had simply expected never to be in a hallway with her. "You have my name," Nadia said. The woman said something in Korean, fast and low, about a review, about documents, about not being authorized to discuss a file. Nadia reached out and took her wrist. Not hard. She had spent her working life around torque limits, and she knew exactly how much pressure holds something without damaging it, and this was that much and no more. She turned the hand over and pulled the glove down off the fingers, and there it was, the small blue ink ghost along the side of the middle finger that right-handed people get from resting on a wet stamp pad, and the calluses in the wrong places for a left hand. "You signed with this," Nadia said, "in Taebaek, on a Tuesday, at 11 in the morning. Let go. I was 180 kilometers west of you, and I have it in pen." Nadia let go, and the letting go was louder than the holding. "I have your car on video. I have your building. I have the 20 minutes the driver sat with the engine running and the pharmacy complaining. I know what you were paid because a man who pays in cash always pays the same amount, and you are going to tell me the amount." The woman did not tell her the amount. She stepped back into the wall, and the folder came up against her chest again, and she said the only true thing she said all night. "I have a family." "So do I," Nadia said. "Mine is in a country I cannot go back to. That is why my name was for sale." That was when the dining room door opened. There were 9 people in that room and 11 seconds of silence after Nadia entered, and Jikyung Oh counted them. And he had worked that floor for 14 months and had never heard anything like it. Seokjin Mok stood up when she came in. The old man at the head of the table did not stand at all. Nadia set the towel down on the sideboard, which was the only thing she did in that room that she would later be embarrassed about. "Sir," she said to Gilyaseo in Korean, "the woman you sent to Tebek is in the corridor. Would you like her to come in, or would you prefer to explain her yourself?" Nobody moved. Gilyaseo picked up his water glass, drank a little, and set it down on the exact ring it had made. "I do not know what you are describing," he said. And Seokjin Mok, who had not sat back down, said, "You paid her 3 million won in cash on the 14th. Her name is in the ledger on the shelf above the vats your father bought in 1961, under a heading that says consultancy. Because you have never in your life put a person's name next to what you actually bought from them. The number on the inside cover is the number of weeks until this woman's hearing. You revise it on Sundays. You are at 13 votes, and you needed 15, and you brought us here tonight because a room like this one makes 13 sound like enough." He did not raise his voice. He said it the way another man might read out a delivery address. "The compliance secretariat that wrote to this household does not exist. It has letterhead and a postbox in Junggu that is rented in the name of a distillery. The housekeeper on this floor has a son in his 2nd year in Seoul, and the tuition invoice comes from an office that carries my family's name, which you arranged, so that when a man came to the loading level twice to ask when a foreign woman arrived and when she left and whether she was ever alone with anyone, she would answer him and hate herself for it." One of the men at the table said Gilyaseo's title, the retired one, in a tone that was asking him to say no. Gilyaseo said, "This is a young man defending a household employee." "No," Seokjin Mok said. "This is the chancellor in waiting telling you something before you can use it. The university's materials list a graduate degree under my name. I never finished it. I withdrew in my 2nd year, in March, and I did not tell my family, and the office corrected the record for me because it was easier than the truth. So there is your no confidence. Put it on the table properly, in front of the board, with my name on it, and I will not contest a word." The room made a sound like a room letting out air, and what none of them knew, what Gilyaseo could not have known while he sat there with his hand flat on the tablecloth, was that the woman by the sideboard was the only person in the building who could still lose everything that night, and she was about to give away the one weapon that would have made it even. "Sir," Nadia said, and this time she said it to Seokjin Mok. "Don't." He turned his head. "You can end him in this room," she said. "I know you can. And in 3 months, every version of tonight ends with a foreign cook who was rescued, and a paper in Taibak that stops being a lie and starts being an early guess." She looked at Gilyaseo then, and she made herself do it slowly. "I have video with a timestamp. I have a register in a notary's office 2 streets from a diesel depot. I have a woman in the corridor with ink on her right hand and a reason. I'm giving all of it to my lawyer, and my lawyer is giving it to the district office, and a copy is going to your board in an envelope with my name spelled correctly, which took 3 attempts the first time." "That takes 3 weeks, Gilyaseo said, and it was almost gentle, and it was the cruelest sentence of the night. "Yes, sir," Nadia said. "I have 5 weeks, so it takes 3. She picked the towel back up off the sideboard because it was hers, and because leaving it there would have looked like a flourish. "I'm not asking anyone here for a favor," she said. "I'm asking to be a person on the record. That is the whole thing I came to this country for." Then she went back through the door, past a small woman with one glove off who was crying without any sound at all, and into a kitchen where the pears were already plated, and she washed her hands twice out of habit. The 3 weeks took 3 weeks. That is the part nobody tells you about doing it properly. It is not dramatic. It is a tired woman in Bupyeong printing frames from a video file and numbering them in the corner in pen. It is a clerk in Taebaek who agreed, after 2 phone calls and 1 refusal, to certify a copy of the register page. It is an envelope, then another envelope, then a receipt for a courier that Nadia kept in date order with everything else. The woman with the ink on her right hand gave a statement on the 9th day. She did it without a lawyer, which her own lawyer later called a mistake. And she asked one thing before she began, which was whether the amount mattered. It was 3 million won. She said it out loud into a recorder in a district office with a broken window latch, and she said the date, and she named the man who paid her, and then she put her face in her hands for a while, and nobody hurried her. Nadia was asked whether she wanted the woman charged. She said that was not hers to decide, and then, when the officer pressed, she said one sentence for the record, that a woman who sells a name for 3 million won is not the person who set the price. The board met on a Tuesday. It took 4 hours. There was no vote of no confidence because you cannot hold one behind a chair's back once the chair has read the seating list. What there was instead was an internal investigation, formally opened, formally minuted, into the use of a fabricated compliance office, a rented postbox in Yonggu, the tuition arrangement for a housekeeper's son, and the retention of a retired member's private channel to 13 voting proxies. Seo attended the first session. He did not attend the second. He was removed as founding trustee emeritus by a vote of the sitting board, and the university returned his family's endowment in scheduled installments over 18 months, which he had to accept because refusing money is only powerful when someone still wants you to keep it. He went back to the warehouse that smelled of wet oak and cold iron. He is still there. He counts, presumably. There is nobody left on the other end of the arithmetic. Seokjin Mok's own matter went to the board in the same envelope, on his own paper, in his own hand. He did not withdraw his name from the chancellorship, and he did not defend the degree. He asked that the record be corrected and that the correction be public. The board suspended his appointment for 11 months and required him to finish the program, which he did, at 29 years old, in a seminar room with people 6 years younger than him who had no idea who he was for the first month. Nadia's hearing came 5 weeks after the dinner, exactly as scheduled. It lasted 52 minutes. The supplemental request was answered with a composition notebook, a certified register page, a video file with a timestamp, and a signature that leaned left. And the officer asked her only one question about the Taebaek Declaration, which was whether she had ever been in that building before that Tuesday in the bus. "No, sir," she said. "I went on my own money to look at my own name." Her status was granted 14 days later. Her lawyer emailed her at 1 in the morning, as she always did. 9 months after that, Nadia stood in a sunlit office on the 3rd floor of a research institute in Songdo with her name on a badge and a photograph on it that she had not taken in a hurry. Prosthetics group, arm assemblies, load transfer, the specific problem of a hand closing on something soft without ruining it. The institute carried the mock name, and she had applied through the posting like everyone else, and she had made him promise not to know about it until the second interview, and he had kept the promise, which she found out later had cost him something. He came at 8:40 in the evening because that had somehow become the hour. Her apartment in Songdo was small and mostly empty, and there was a lamp on the floor because she had not bought a table yet, and on the windowsill sat a battered quadcopter with one arm splinted in epoxy and a strip of aluminum from a baking sheet. He looked at it every time. He had never once asked her to explain it. They ate on the floor. She told him about a servo that kept overshooting by 3 degrees. He listened, the way he listened, which was completely, and then he said, "You put your hand on the frame when you talk about it." "Do I?" "Every time." A pause, 1 second longer than was comfortable, which she had long stopped minding. "You did it in the kitchen too, on the oven housing." The city went on being indifferent below them, all that light and nobody watching. "Say something true," she said. He set his chopsticks down flat, the way she did, which he had learned from her without either of them mentioning it. "You never once asked me to save you," he said. "I have been in rooms my whole life with people asking. I did not know it was possible not to." She had learned that a name is not a thing you own, it is a thing you defend. She had learned that the slowest road is sometimes the only one that arrives with you still on it. She had learned that being seen is not the same as being rescued, and that only one of them lets you stay. And then Seokjin Mok smiled fully, the way he had maybe twice in 2 years, and it was only for her. If this story meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me what you would have said to Jikyung Oh in that dining room if it had been you standing there with the towel in your hand. I read every single one. If you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications, and I promise the next story will be even harder to walk away from. Thank you for watching until the very end. I will see you in the next one.